The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Chairman, that was a very relaxed speech from a very relaxed minister. And I think relaxation in the area of animal welfare is something that he is becoming renowned for. Mr Speaker, we have an appalling history and series of practices in New Zealand in animal welfare, both on farms, in particular on poultry and pig farms, but not only there. We have an appalling record of cruelty to some pets, and we have a minister who regularly, when there is a crisis, fails to act, fails to show concern, and pretends that the ineffectual approach taken by a ministry which is basically understaffed and scared to do proper promotion of animal welfare, he pretends that that's okay. Mr Chairman, it is not, and a slow approach to this piece of legislation, which was introduced in May of 2013, that languished on the order paper until August 2013 when the government gave it a first reading. It was reported back in June of last year. It got a second reading in November of last year, and now, nearly 2 years after its introduction, we have come to look at the details of the bill. Minister, anyone who cared about animal welfare would have given this legislation higher priority than that minister has. The Labour Party finds cruelty to animals abhorrent. But we also know, and my colleague Damien O'Connor often reminds us, that the international reputation of our exporters depends on having good policies and practices in New Zealand. And the example of a few idiot farmers can destroy the reputation of our primary industry and place at danger our exports across a wide range. It's particularly important going into Europe, becoming more important going into the United States, but even now in the Asian market at the top end, people are looking at the practices that we have in looking for premium product. And Mr Chairman, if we ignore that, we ignore some of the best markets for our product, and as I say, there are some idiot farmers who place that at risk, and frankly, the attitude of the minister and of his ministry is far too often to turn a blind eye to it, not to crack down, and not to prosecute. Mr Chairman, this legislation is better than what is currently in place, but it will depend on the enforcement. And frankly, a government which takes 2 years to get legislation through, that has really stretched the agency responsible for enforcement, does not bring a lot of faith to me in the ability to get this sorted. I do want to compliment the Minister. I think now 700 days after it was brought to the government's attention, the bill now has an SOP which addresses the cosmetic testing issue. It wasn't an issue on the first reading. It wasn't an issue in the Select Committee. It was not an issue on the second reading, but at last the government has folded. And I want to join the congratulations to Mojo Mathers for the work that she has done on leading on this issue. It's something that she knows she has always had our support on, but the fact that the Minister has finally caught up with the importance of international reputation in this area to the rest of our primary industries is something which is a compliment to her. Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Chairman, and for that reason we will of course support the Minister's SOP. Mr. Chairman, I have a supplementary order paper which is number 48 to the bill. What this supplementary order paper does is, within clause 56 of the bill, replaces a 10-year phase-in with a 5-year renewal process for the abolition of cruel practices with a 7-year period. What we are saying is that we shouldn't have cruel practices at all, but what we do accept is that changing the practices in some farming operations is going to take some time. And what we want to do is to be reasonable as to farmers in order to make the changes. But, Mr. Chairman, 15 years to stop the awful practices that we see on many of our pig farms. Practices that are actually worse than the practices of a generation or two before. They've just got to stop, and 15 years to stop it is just far too long. And so that is why I'm moving supplementary order paper number 48. And what that does is take the 10-year cruel practice exemption that the Minister can grant, and he can grant a 5-year renewal, down to a maximum of 7 years with no right of renewal. And I say to the Minister, if that's not good enough, if he thinks that farmers will in fact need a longer period, if he thinks it should be renewed after 7 years, then he should, I can accept as an opposition member, because he will be by that stage, he should bring something back to the Parliament for the whole Parliament to consider. Because I think it is unreasonable for any minister, whatever their party, to be left with a right to continue for 15 years practices which this House today is deciding are unacceptable. We are making a decision to have a better regime, but granting a minister time and ability to override it, and that is something, in my opinion, which is not acceptable. There are a further series of supplementary order papers that the House is considering. We will be guided by Mojo Mathers as far as whether she wants her one to go through as well. I'm assuming that the Minister's one will override her one, but if that's not the case, it would be good to have discussion on that one. We will not be supporting supplementary order paper 355 in Mojo Mathers' name. We think it is appropriate for there to be a balance for practicality and economics in making decisions on the part of the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. That is something which I think you've got to do as part of that process, and taking out that balance is something which I think goes a step too far. So we won't be supporting, as we've indicated to her, that particular SOP. We will be supporting the deprivation of life for non-human hominids. It is, except this is generally known as the Great Apes issue, and we support the supplementary order paper, which essentially limits to euthanasia the reasons for putting down, for killing apes within New Zealand. It can't just be a matter of convenience. So, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of, and of course we were, and I'm pleased to hear that the Minister is to be supportive of the tidying up of his untidy work on the legislation. Mr Speaker, the bill is better than the current legislation, but not good enough.
I'm calling Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Chair.